Hi, everyone. It's Sanjay Srivastava in Palo Alto this morning, and I am really happy to introduce you to Nishat Mehta. Nishat, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And Nishat is president at IRI. Nishat, first off, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. So IRI is a 40-year-old company. We focus primarily on the consumer goods and associated retail space. We've been known for market insights. We provide insights to the CPG space. And the obvious next step for us was once we provide an insight around the type of individuals that buy your products, for instance, people would begin to ask us, what can I do with this information? And the logical conclusion was you should be able to leverage it in your marketing efforts. And so I look after a team here at IRI that is focused on the activation side of things. How can we leverage all of the data that we have about what consumers purchase and ultimately help the brands and manufacturers leverage that data in their marketing efforts?
So data, analytics, data science, and artificial intelligence, we're going to get through all of that in a minute. How did you get to be in the role that you're in now?
I think a number of different approaches, right? So everybody has their own path. There's nothing about this particular path that, is the right path, if you will. But I have a fairly technical background, degrees in mathematics and computer science. Frankly, I don't use either one in my day job. The last time I wrote a piece of code in an Excel macro, for my mother a few years ago. But I do think that there is something to be said for the sort of technical background in a couple of areas. One, an ability to understand data science, even if I'm not actually the one writing the code or building the methodology. And then two, I'm a big fan of just coding in general in terms of the way of thinking. It helps take a big problem, break it into small pieces, and then fine tune each piece before you put them all back together again. I think that applies whether you're writing code or whether you're running a business, which is made up of a variety of different components. So I do certainly feel like the educational background has a lot to do with that, and whether it's a degree in computer science or just learning the sort of basics of writing code, I think that's an extremely important part of our educational system. From there, I spent a lot of time, I spent 15 years actually with a business intelligence firm, a company called MicroStrategy. And one of the things I think I probably learned out of that, in addition to sort of the client-facing aspect of things, is that I wanted to work for a company that actually owned or had proprietary rights over data. Simply having a technology company, it was a little bit more difficult to have a technology as my competition because it's very easy to compete with others on technology, but if the proprietary sort of moat that we've built in my most recent few companies is really around the data asset that we have that no one else has access to. And so that caused a movement for me about 7.5 years ago into this space around media marketing, where I joined a company called dunnhumby, which became a company called 8451, which is a division of the Kroger company. And now at IRI, all three of these have been in the same type of role, which is CPG, leveraging data assets around what people buy for marketing benefit.
Wow, that's a fantastic background. I do agree with you that technology or math or engineering gives you the ability to disintegrate a problem into its pieces and solve each at the root level. And then I think if you can balance that with sort of a business approach that allows you to think outside the box and think comprehensively end to end, that's a great starting point, and it's obvious in what you've done. Listen, Nishat, let's sort of get into the heart of the matter then. Data and data science means a lot to you and obviously people around you, but just for the broader world, what is the role of data in consumer goods? Just talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So one of the huge benefits of consumer goods is the frequency, right? We all go to a grocery store or a drugstore or a Walmart or a Costco probably every week, sometimes multiple times a week. Yeah. We buy potato chips or cookies or, pasta or whatever it is that you buy, again, on a weekly basis. And so over time, you build up some incredible patterns that you can start to understand about a consumer. And in fact, more importantly, it's the breaks in those patterns that can oftentimes teach us quite a bit. I buy Campbell's soup every single week, and all of a sudden, one particular week, the store might have been out of my particular flavor. But what did I buy instead? Did I simply change flavors? Did I change brands? Did I change the size of what I would buy? And based on that, you can start to build almost a decision tree in my mind of how the consumer typically buys soup, in my example, or milk, or eggs, et cetera. And so for me, data science, the beauty of data science, I think, as we all know, is the more data you have, the less science you need, effectively, the more sort of insights you can develop. And in consumer goods, we are an industry that has a significant amount of data. I think that
one second. So, I mean, you're talking about the fact that we get all this data and you can actually predict consumer insights and actions and kind of understand them better. But why do you want to do that, and why now? I mean, we've operated all this while without all this, and why has this become such a big thing all of a sudden?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So I oftentimes use an example of, you know, the corner store owner from, call it, you know, centuries ago, right, 100, 150 years ago, where you've got this individual who had the one store in town. The town was, you know, 1,000 people, a couple hundred families, and he knew every one of them. He knew every one of them personally. He knew their kids. He knew their kids' preferences. He knew the influencers, if you will, in town, those that, you know, that were friendly to others, and if he could convince them of something, they would go off and convince their friends of something else. That individual was able to keep all of it in his mind. And so if somebody walked through the store, even if I, you know, hey, I just got this new order of this new product that I think you guys would love, you should absolutely try it. That's how that worked. Now, we obviously live in a world today where Walmart has, you know, multiple thousand stores that need to serve 300 million people across the country, and that can no longer be stored in one person's head. And so I think that the real beauty of data science is, you know, it's also furthered by the fact that the corner store a couple hundred years ago might have been, you know, 5,000 square feet. It might have carried a couple hundred SKUs at most. Today, Walmart carries over 1 million SKUs, right? And the choice for a granola bar has massively expanded. So for me as a consumer, how do I sift through all of the choices that I have, and how do I look to my retailer to actually start making suggestions for me? That would form the loyalty that we all strive for between a consumer and a brand.
Yeah, so that's really interesting, because what you're really saying is that as scale is driving a completely different dynamic in the world out there, and that scale then needs, and you still need to be able to deliver personalization in the way you actually come to market and address, you know, sort of that 150 years ago, the neighborhood store feel to it. And data analytics is allowing us to be able to address that. So that makes sense to me.
If I can just add one other quick thought there, because I think one of the things we've done in a lot of our research is recognized how loyalty is actually created between, for instance, a retailer and a consumer. If a consumer actually has to pick from, say, 200 coupons that the retailer simply puts up on a website, but the consumer actually decides to pick, you know, coupon 1, 6, and 8, the consumer oftentimes is the one that feels that they've done the work. The flip side is if the retailer is actually sending the consumer the specific 10 coupons that we think are going to be most relevant to you, then in fact the consumer gives credit to the retailer for having done the culling or curating of the information, and that's oftentimes what builds loyalty. And so that's, again, where we find the data being very important. It's not simply to give the consumer all of the data, but rather use the data to be the curating factor.
And we can all relate to that from our personal lives, so that's a great example. Let me change gears though. I mean, Nishat, this sounds really wonderful, and yet there is residency, privacy, security, regulatory, and so many other concerns. And we've seen this play this out. And so, you know, what's your advice for businesses that are embracing this journey of data analytics, artificial intelligence, on the role that this plays, and how to sort of think about design philosophies for what you want to do in your business?
Yeah, so this is a big area of focus for us for obvious reasons. I'm a big believer in trying to get out of a sort of cat and mouse game where we make a tweak and then the regulation comes along and fixes that tweak and then we make another tweak. And I think at the end of the day, it's oftentimes important to focus on the North Star. What is the North Star that we, and frankly, the regulation is trying to achieve? And I think that really comes down to one fairly clear statement, which is the consumer always gets what they want. We may not know exactly how the path is that will get there, but you can look at industries throughout the world in history. The music industry is a favorite one of mine, probably a favorite one for a lot of people that are listening to this. The music industry obviously had a model, call it 2.5 decades ago, where you had to spend $16 to buy a CD that you might have only liked one song, but too bad, you had to buy the entire CD. And then things like Napster showed up. Clearly showed that consumers wanted a different model. You then had these bizarre situations of regulatory, issues trying to shut down Napster. You had the record labels trying to sue their own consumers because they were sort of pirating music. And effectively, you end up with an iTunes model that's a 99 cent or $1.29 for a track. And now, of course, you have streaming services that have effectively returned the record label back to the size of the industry it was 2.5 decades ago, but via a very winding path, because that's what the consumer actually wanted. I think when it comes to regulation and data privacy, I think we think the same way. That the end goal, the end result here is that the consumer needs to get what they want. And what they want is, I will share data if I know that that data is going to be used for my benefit. And as a result, the regulation is simply trying to accelerate that path. Don't track me if I haven't given you permission to do so. Don't use my data to make decisions on things that don't benefit me. And probably most importantly, give me some control over what data I share and what data I don't share. In our industry, in consumer goods, much of the data that we collect is based on the loyalty card, which is probably one of the clearest mechanisms of data exchange. The consumer, every single time they shop, chooses whether or not to show their loyalty card to the cashier or not, and knows that by doing so, they will share their data with the actual retailer. And we hear all the time about people that are concerned about opt-outs, and with California's new recent Consumer Protection or Privacy Act, that it's going to increase the amount of opt-outs. And the way I look at that is that's probably a good thing, because those that opt out are physically telling you that I don't like my data to be used in the way in which you're choosing to use it. And frankly, a marketer's message was never going to cut through the ultimate bias the consumer had to misuse of their data. And so that's really the way we think about it, is how can we use data for good? How can we use data for good towards the consumer? And as a result, you'll see things like, for instance, we don't allow our data to be used for conquesting. We don't allow Coca-Cola, for instance, to buy an audience of loyal Pepsi buyers, because we just don't think that would be good for the Pepsi consumer. Frankly, nor do we think that would be good for Coca-Cola. Those campaigns don't perform very well. So that's sort of one example of how we look at that.
It's a great example. It's a great point about how to design for the future. And instead of sort of responding to this regulatory piece and that evolving threat and this and the other cat and mouse game, as you call it, actually figure out the North Star. And the North Star is, what does the consumer really want? And I think your advice that the consumer ultimately gets what they want, and the whole example of Apple Music and Spotify, I think is fantastic. It's right on the point. So I'm going to change directions because I want to cover one other topic. We talked a little bit about a few of these things, but the area we haven't covered now, and I'd like to cover now, is the human in the loop. I mean, we're talking about data science. We're talking about lots of data. We're talking about using artificial intelligence to drive insights, to predict better. And in all of this, what is the role of the human in this, and how do you think about that?
Yeah. So I have a fairly, maybe broad view or kind of a meta view on this, and it comes a little bit from a sort of a biology background, right? So think of the world we live in, where frankly the human race is, we are evolved, and we continue to evolve through diversification, right? The individuals on this world are very diverse, and it allows us to survive things that the world throws at us. I think in technology, we actually see the exact opposite, right? We see that most technology trends trend towards a monopoly. You can look back on Y2K, for instance, this idea that all of our technological systems were built on a set of technologies that had a 2-digit date code in them. And in fact, the whole world could have become complete chaos had something failed. In my opinion, I think that the way that I tend to look at data science is the same way, that if data science has no human element to it, it's a piece of technology, and every single company, including my competitors, can use that same technology, in which case, how have we really differentiated ourselves? We've entered a homogeneous environment, and in that homogeneous environment, no one has an advantage. And in fact, all of us are threatened by the exact same shift in the actual ecosystem around us. And so for me, I really think of data science not as a machine-driven activity, but rather as a true partnership between offloading things that a machine is great at doing, and then using the human brain for the things that a machine can't necessarily do well, or that requires the sort of future and predictive component to it. One example that I oftentimes bring up is quant trading, right? So if every trader used the exact same algorithms, they use the exact same historical data points, the efficient markets hypothesis would argue that we would already be pricing in what the algorithm told us the stock will do today or tomorrow, in which case no one gets an advantage. And so in fact, the way that things need to work is you use quant to process all of the historical data, but a human element is still required in order for the alpha, if you will, for the trader to actually get their competitive advantage versus their competition. I think the same is true in data science. And so we start to use, phrases like augmented decision making, where the data is simply being used to help augment a human to make a decision rather than making the decision for them.
I think you're so right. I think we started separating prediction from judgment and judgment from action. And we think that artificial intelligence is going to allow us to crack the code on prediction and get great insights. But on the back of those insights, we still need to apply human judgment to make a decision. And then obviously we have to then go act on it and put that into play. And in many ways, that's a partnership, that's a complementary role. And I think the word you use, augmentation, is actually a fantastic word for it. Well, listen, Nishat, it's been awesome to get to know you. It's been great to just sort of, hear your perspective on sort of what you do and your background. I think the three areas that touched upon are critical: the role of data science, analytics, and artificial intelligence, and why is it so relevant now? The point about personalization being the big change we're trying to drive in our economy of scale now. I think the perspective on, if I'm a CEO running my own business, how should I think about data science, and how should I think about the design philosophy of data, and walk through all the twists and turns of regulatory and other considerations that need to come through. And I think designing and addressing the consumer need, and realizing that the consumer will always get what they want. And so using that as a North Star, as you call it, is fantastic. And I think your last point about really the role of AI in decision sciences as an augmentation capability is right on the mark, and judgment, human judgment, becomes even more powerful. It becomes even more better when it's backed with the right prediction and the right toolkit. So listen, it's been fantastic having you here. I'm sure you're going to hear directly from some of our viewers. Thank you for joining us this morning, and take care. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Goodbye.